afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the September meeting of the Maine Agricultural Food System and Forest Products Infrastructure Investment Fund. I'm going to be able to say that in one breath before we're done. We have a good long agenda today. We'll start with a review of our working agreements. If anyone has any questions or objections to those, we'll ask for you at this in a short while. Then we'll have presentations from the key decisions that are needed from round one and a slideshow presentation that Lily will lead us through. We'll have breakout groups that are facilitated by members of the department. And then we'll have a breakout session report. We'll have a full group discussion to sort of talk about what we will vote on in October at our in-person meeting, which would be the initial program design for the $500,000 of the fund and anything else we decide to vote on. At this time, before we begin, we know now that we have a new member of this group from Maine Farmland Trust. Is Alex with us today? I don't think I see Alex.
I'm here. Hello.
There you are. Hi. Welcome. Good to see you. And I wanted to just ask if anyone wanted to identify themselves as someone who would like to serve in the role of co-chair. The statute requires a chair, and the board has the discretion to appoint any other members as officers of this group. And so if you could just introduce yourself, if you would like to be considered as the co-chair for this board, and we will vote on that finally, again, in our in-person meeting in October. So is there anyone on the board who wishes to volunteer to be considered for the role of co-chair along with myself? And then you'll work in tandem with the department on planning and on meeting run of show and anything else that the board needs your leadership on. Anyone? Director?
I just wanted to say, I want to leave the floor open, but one member has expressed that willingness to me, but I don't see her yet. So there's at least one person, Sarah Littlefield, who at least expressed to me that she would be willing to serve. So I'll just throw that out there.
And Sarah Littlefield from the Maine Dairy Promotion Board, Director?
Correct. Yes.
Well, seeing that no one else has stepped forward to identify themselves, we will certainly take that interest up and we'll let Sarah speak for herself, either later in this meeting or at our in-person meeting before the board decides to vote on accepting that as our co-chair. The public is with us today, and I just wanted to say up front that we plan to have breakout groups, and generally speaking, all of these meetings should be accessible to the public, even if they are not invited to participate. So when we get to the breakout room, unless there's an objection from any board member or department, we will ask members of the public who may want to join one of the subject matter breakout rooms if they would like to do that. And I'll have Tom put you in that breakout group. You may not be able to participate in that breakout group, but at least you can be witness to the conversations that happen. Rest assured, when we come back together, we will have a pretty robust description of the conversations that happen in those breakout rooms for the public record. And if any member of the public, of course, has any objection to any of this at any time, please reach out to myself or to Lily to make sure that the public feels as though that they are part of a transparent process. Are there any questions from the board members about that? Lily, did you want to say anything about that as well?
Nope. I think that is very clear, so we'll go forward with that. I'm just trying to figure out my I'm on here twice, it looks like, so I may take a quick moment to figure out what's going on with my computer, and then we can get going with next steps.
Excellent. And just to ask again at the beginning of every meeting, does anyone have any objection to our working agreements or any additions you might like to add? Great. Seeing none, we're just going to move straight forward then, and I will turn this over to Lily to walk us through the slideshow that she has prepared that will present to us key decisions needed for round one fund design, including timeline, parameters, evaluation criteria, and eligibility. Lily, great to see you. The floor is yours.
Okay, well, hi, everybody. I've had a chance to speak with almost all of you this past month, one-on-one. There's a few folks that I'm still trying to get a hold of. So I just wanted to, first of all, appreciate your time and having the chance to meet. If we didn't get to meet in person, I'd love to do that as well. But I think virtual is also okay. Really do appreciate getting to know you and your organizations better. Today, as Senator Hickman said, we are going to go over a number of areas that we will have to make decisions on. And I wanted to make sure that we take this meeting to truly understand what we're talking about. And so that when we meet in person in October, we can come to consensus on a number of different areas. Now, if you have an idea that you don't see in the presentation I'm about to share, the PowerPoint that was shared with you in email, feel free to still present it. Feel free to bring it up. This isn't exhaustive. It's just me reflecting back what I've heard from you, the board. For today's presentation, it's a bit long, so it's broken up in 3 sections. After I finish the section, I'll take a pause for a minute or two so that folks can write down their thoughts and ideas that they'll talk about later in their breakout group as well as in the plenary session. Please feel free to use the chat if you have a question, a thought, an idea. Feel free to use emojis if you want. We want to make sure this is interactive and that everybody feels that they have a chance to engage and comment. I also know that some people take a little bit longer. They want to hear, they want to have time to process the information they're given. And so after this meeting, after you've had time to think, you can then send it by email. We saw a few emails. I got a few emails as well with people's ideas and thoughts. So there's a lot of different ways to express yourself and to share your opinion, your perspective. And what I'll do is I'll gather it all up and put it in one document afterwards that we can see before the October meeting. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see here.
Lily, may I just say one thing before you share your screen? And this is no disrespect to members of the public, but because sometimes the format of this runs on a lot of bandwidth. If you are not a member of the board, can you please turn your camera off? It will just make it a little easier for the flow. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Please proceed.
Great. Thank you so much. And so I will share my screen as I'm figuring out. Dun, dun, dun. Okay. Let me just go to. Okay. Can everybody see the screen okay? Okay.
Yes.
I see a real thumbs up from Alex, not an emoji thumbs up, but that will work. Great. Thank you, everybody. So once again, this presentation is divided into 3 parts. So the first part, we're going to talk a little bit about the AFPIF fund, what is already established, what needs to be established, and what would be a use of funding tools for round 1 of funding. The section 2 will be about evaluation criteria. This was developed by InCommon, who got feedback from all of you, and as well as did analysis of other similar funds. So really about how applications are scored. And again, section 3 is around eligibility, who can apply, what can the funds be used for. This again was developed by InCommon, that was basically interviewed the board and also did analysis with other similar funds. So section 1, where we talk about kind of what are we going to do with round 1 of funding. For this, I wanted to, first of all, backtrack a little bit and give us all the same context. So we know that AFPIF has a statute. That statute is found online, and it really lays the very, very broad-based, raison d'etre, the reason of this fund. The next step is a more of administrative step, and this is the rulemaking process that Maine uses to set up how a fund will operate. The rules come after the statute, but before what we call requests for applications or RFAs. It provides these broad guardrails for how the fund will operate. So it's kind of like the big picture items. It needs to include everything that this fund how this fund may operate. It may have a revolving fund. It may be for small grants or for large grants. It basically just sets up the big boundaries. So I am working on that based on input from the board as well as analysis from InCommon and others. And this process does have a public comment period, so that will happen. But we also need to think about the specifics. Those specifics come out, as I said, in the request for applications, or RFAs is what we usually say. So the RFA would be issued for each round of funding that we have. So we might want to have rules say that this fund could have a revolving fund, large grants, small grants, micro grants, or other revenue sharing programs. But the RFA will be for that specific type. So it's going to provide details of the funding for that round, which will be based on availability of funds. It doesn't have to be annually. It could be annually or biannually. It depends again on funds and what the board wants to do. And it can set application times, deadlines, and provide a lot more details on priorities or focus areas for that round of funding. It also can provide more details on evaluation rubrics. For example, at the rule level, we know that this is an infrastructure fund and we know that it's for underserved populations, but we might have more evaluation rubrics that we need to come up with for that specific RFA. So the key decisions that we're looking at right now is for round one of funding. We know that this fund currently has $500,000 worth of funding. So how do we want to see that realized? Do we want to see, we've talked about this in past meetings about having micro or small grants, larger grants, making sure that whatever the application process is, it's not so rigorous that it's not worth the time for the applicant, or it's so hard that nobody can apply for it. We talked about maybe having more relaxed criteria for very small grants. So we need to talk about that today. So based on your input and meeting with folks, I've outlined 3 possible round one funding options. They're not mutually exclusive. You may combine ideas, you may come up with another option, but these are what I've overwhelmingly heard. So just for a quick recap, we already have a statute. We're in the process of drafting the rules, which are the broad guardrails for the fund. Allows us to kind of say this was all the things that it could possibly do. And now we're going to talk about what we want to see in the RFA. So today it's just to present these 3 options and to have discussion. Over the next month, we can ruminate, we can discuss more, but then the board will need to come to consensus in the October meeting, which will be an in-person meeting. So with that, I'll go into the different options. This was already shared with the board members, so hopefully it's not too much of a surprise. So option 1, this is where there would be a number of micro and small grants. Again, they could have a more kind of very accessible, relaxed criteria application. You could have many grants for 10,000. If we feel that that's not enough, you might want to say 15,000 is good for a small grant. And then we could have a number of maybe more medium to larger grants, which are serving as anchor grants. Then if we think it's feasible to have a revolving loan at this point in time, we could set aside funds for a low interest loan program and working with a partner. Let's just see. Let's see. Okay. And then we still need to think about having money set aside for technical assistance. Technical assistance can be seen in a couple different ways. I've heard a lot of feedback that applicants need technical assistance with actually applying or getting ready and organized to apply, and then also with the implementation of their grants. So they might need support with reporting, things like that. That's one type of technical assistance. And then there's also technical assistance that if a company or a business has a new piece of equipment or something for infrastructure, they might need technical assistance on using that as well. So this is option 1, grants plus loans plus TA. Option 2 would be grants only. Again, this is only for this first round of funding. We still are looking to be fully capitalized through a number of different ways with the department, and I know when this fund is fully capitalized, it will give more leeway for different types of ways of supporting the populations and the communities here in Maine. So this option again is just grants only. The board would need to decide how much should we set aside for kind of those micro small grants that are more accessible. We can help more businesses, but it would be for a smaller amount of money. How much should we set aside for the medium to larger grants? And what would technical assistance look like? So, for your discussion and your thoughts, there's a couple of different questions there based on really similar across the board, but for us to think about what does eligibility or reporting look like between different tiers of grants. So something for folks for discussion and to think about. Now, the grants only would be administered by the department at this point in time. And again, this is just for this round of funding, round one. And the last is kind of an innovative idea. Would have a lot of things to iron out, but it doesn't mean it's not possible. And if anybody else has innovative ideas, we'd love to hear them as well. But we could still have a number of kind of your more typical small grants, medium, large grants that we would decide on the amount on the tiers of funding. But is it possible for there to be some sort of loan interest buy down? Is that feasible? Could we do it where if somebody already had an infrastructure loan and they have a high interest, could we subsidize a number of loans to help reduce their interest payments? So that is a discussion that we need to see. Is this possible? It could be a great way to help underserved businesses that if they just had a little boost, it would make all the difference in the world between being successful and not successful. And so if this is possible, there's a number of questions to figure out how to do it. Would the subsidies flow to the lenders or would it go to the borrowers? How would we organize this? So that's another option. So those are the three options I heard for to structure this round one with 500,000 of funding. So what I would like the group to do, I see a lot of people just joined. Hi, folks who just joined. I was able to talk to most of you in person, but we just walked through three possible different options of the way to structure the first round of funding. So if you could, I'd ask everybody to look at their PowerPoint that was already sent. And I'm going to ask folks to take a minute or two to jot down their thoughts. And then I'll go to the other sections where we need to also consider uh, other decision makings. And as you're doing that, just to point out, there are areas of commonality across all three of these options. It's for the same fund, right? Which is number one, how are we supporting underserved populations on infrastructure projects? So equity and access is very important. We want to make sure that we have simple, low barrier applications. We want to make sure we have TA support. I think we talked a lot about in the past about having catalytic impact. In round one of funding, we may not have a lot of funding, but we can really make sure that it has some kind of high impact investments or at least support. We talked too about needing to have flexibility. When we think about eligible or ineligible costs, where do we want to see that flexibility? And we also talked about wanting to make sure that we have geographic reach with this fund. So there's areas of commonality across all options. It's just kind of like we're working on the ingredients of the cake that we're baking right now. So if everyone could take a minute to think about, jot down your thoughts that you can refer back to in our breakout session in our plenary. I will move on to section 2 in just a second. So I'm just going to pause for a second. Again, if folks have comments, they can feel free to put comments in the chat if you want to, if you can't wait. But in the meantime, just jot down your thoughts. Okay, I'm gonna move to the next two sections, which are a little bit um, less intensive. It's good for our timing. And section 2 is looking at evaluation criteria. There is a report in your meeting materials packet that goes into more detail with this, that In Common, who's on the call now, on the wrote, and they interviewed folks. And, you know, I think we all, this is just to orient ourselves, but I think we all understand evaluation criteria and metrics. But, you know, as I said, In Common kind of took together a number of discussions, interviews, looking at the state benchmarking study, among other pieces of items, and they kind of pulled them together to discuss how we should organize this fund so that it can advise us. So they asked a few questions that I've been referring to as well. You know, what is the most important criteria for metrics, et cetera. And for the first slide that you can see here, this matrix, it would be for larger or medium grants. And there are like points that are put here that we can also adjust, but again, it's just for example. So, you know, the first area would be around statutory goals. We need to think about how does this project strengthens Maine's ag, food, or forest products economy. We want to make sure that the project increases investments in historically marginalized, underrepresented, and underserved communities, which would be a high level of points. Those are basically the two big reasons of the fund. We know that access to capital is the number one barrier, I think, that was identified. So how does this project help address barriers to capital access? How would it help businesses start or scale or innovate? And then I think timeline is important. We want to make sure this isn't something that needs, you know, 20 years to complete. So that's the idea. And then there is the feasibility part, which making sure that it's a wise investment on our part. I think we can be a little riskier to help those that maybe can't get a loan from a bank, but I still, you know, we still want to support a viable project. And then there's the part around demonstrated business need. Why does this business need a grant? Why can't they just get a loan or otherwise? And then of course there's the basic kind of administrative things like budget, et cetera. So this is really looking at how businesses, I think at a more of a systematic level, are helping area like underserved communities. If you look at the
Lily, did you still want to be sharing your screen? For some reason, I don't see it on my computer. I don't know if anybody else is having that same issue. Because you're still going through the slides, correct?
Yes, and my computer says I'm screen sharing.
It might just be me. Yes, I hear people can still see it. So please continue.
Okay, sorry. All right, we're on, just for your reference, now we're on the evaluation criteria and metrics for micro grants or small grants. And this is where we were talking about micro grants and small grants. Maybe they should have less, I don't want to say rigorous, but we want to make it very accessible because it's not as much funding. So we want to make sure that it's a feasible activity, but that it's relatively like easier. I don't know if easier is the right word, but is very accessible for folks to apply to. And so this is really looking at how are we supporting individual entities, underserved businesses, underserved communities, like directly. So it's fairly similar if you look at the scoring criteria, but there's a few differences. And the point systems are slightly different. Now, when we have an RFA fully developed, we may have some more specific evaluation criteria once we have that, but this should be kind of the larger across the board evaluation criteria and metrics. And then we don't have a matrix for this one, but if we do have a revolving fund, or we do eventually have one, we will need to think about the evaluation criteria for that. So would that look like a two-step process, a two-step review? Because we would want to make sure the applicants of the loan fund is aligned with AFPIF's goal, is aligned of serving underserved communities, and aligned with infrastructure. So would the board, this is something for us to discuss in person in October, would the board first review applicants and then after they were selected, would it go to the step 2 or the partner financial institution would then go through those applicants to check their financial fit? Or would it be opposite? Or would we just have the financial institution do everything? So that's something that I think the board should discuss, should think about this next month and discuss in person. Are there other key considerations that we need to think of for revolving funds as well when it comes to evaluation criteria? It's a little different than grants. So with that, I'm just going to take a minute for us to write down your thoughts and your questions, and then we'll go to our last section, which is eligibility. All right. So our last section for our discussion is to think about eligible and ineligible uses and eligible and ineligible entities. And so when we were working with In Common Group on this, we could come up with some clear eligible and ineligible areas, but we still need to make sure the board agrees. And then there was a couple areas for discussion. So, we know obviously, I think eligible, we talked about agriculture, food forestry, food systems, forestry and forest products equipment, construction and capital improvements, but we did have a question about, for example, labor for building, marketing costs. I think it's okay to hire technical consultants as part of TA. And we did talk about applicants could apply for workforce training so that if it was related to infrastructure. For ineligible, anything that wasn't related to infrastructure programs, for example, livestock purchases, that's not infrastructure. So if somebody wants to buy 100 goats, this fund's probably not for them. But if you want to build a new shed for those goats, maybe that would work. Land purchases or easements, we said no, that's ineligible. We can go through the list here, but other ones were mortgage payments, for example, and of course, any purchases outside the time of the contract period would have to be ineligible. And then we had a couple areas where we need to discuss. And again, I don't think we're going to come to a conclusion today, but it's something to think about so that in October we come to a conclusion. So our energy efficiency and renewable energy projects, is that something that would be considered? Is workforce training, when it came to NGOs doing the workforce training, would that count, or did it have to be workforce training only for that company? We talked a little bit about soil amendments. I think I heard yeses and nos, like, is it biochar? Is that infrastructure related? Is it, that's a gray area. Vehicles, do they count as infrastructure investments? Software, computers, phones. And then this is a little different, but it is for discussion. Other funds may say that something has to have 51% of main ingredients. So do we want to make sure if they're doing food processing Or if it is supporting some sort of product like processing, that the 51% or some X percentage of materials all need to come from Maine, because then it will support the kind of the greater ecosystem. What should that number look like? And then again, we talked about research and development. So this is, again, you can think about this as what all of the fund that would go into rulemaking could support. And then we would think about what we want specifically in this round of funding through the RFA. Next is eligible and ineligible entities. So we didn't have as much for discussion, but really it's all for discussion. So we talked about eligible entities should of course be farm and agriculture producers, but do we need to define that a little bit? Is it only like food producers? Are there any, other USDA grants often say you have to make at least $2,000 a year off of your farm? Do we want to adopt that as well? Does anybody have any ideas or thoughts on that? We talked about supporting agricultural co-ops, for example, food manufacturing businesses, because that's part of food processing and food systems. That could include seafood, but it seems like on the production side, we're not including aquaculture. So that's something we need to verify. We talked about nonprofits, forestry and logging operations, and then forest products as well. So people that are processing different types of forest products. We all think, that's what we heard, should be eligible. But if you have other thoughts, please share them. Non-eligible entities. So this is, again, we talked about the aquaculture operations. I don't think that's part of this fund, but they could be part of the food processing part. So it's something for the board to provide input on. And of course, if you're not engaged with farming, food, or forestry, this isn't the fund for you. So is there anything that we forgot here? Anything that we need to discuss? That's what we'd like the board to talk about. So again, we want the board to be able to provide input through different ways. We're about to go into our breakout session, and the breakout sessions will be by sector. As Senator Hickman said, if you're a member of the public that's joined, I think you could write in the chat which group you want to be part of. There's agriculture, there's food systems, and there's forestry products. Or you could sit out the plenary session or the small group session and join us in the plenary session. I'm also not opposed if a small committee wants to work with me over the next month to kind of, as I gather the feedback, and make it into kind of a digestible presentation for folks for the October meeting to come to consensus. I'm also I would appreciate and really enjoy working with folks as well. So there is that possibility as well. So right now we're going to discuss in small groups. We'll come back and read out that discussion, and then we'll discuss in the larger group. And we really want to make sure there's a chance, a space for larger discussion. So that's really the focus of today's meeting, is just having a chance for us to share our thoughts. After this meeting, I'll probably ping everybody by email again for more thoughts and discussions. And then, as I said, I'll put it all together and have it kind of in a digestible format for you all before the October meeting. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen if I can figure that out.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lily.
Okay.
It looks like we're going to break out now. And there are 2 members of the public who have requested to at least witness the discussion in the breakout groups. Tammy Taylor would like to join forestry products. And Bill Soretta says food system group. Do you mean the infrastructure of the food processing group or the agricultural group? You mean the food processing group, I would assume, Mr. Soretta? Yes, great. And there are a couple of other folks who are doing that. So at this point, Tom, when you are ready to divide us into our 3 sectors.
Okay. How long do you want to spend in breakout?
We are scheduled to be in breakout for half an hour, and we are only 1 minute over schedule. So let's just go straight for 30 minutes.
Very good. I will open all the rooms now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. If you are back in full view, again, if you are a member of the board, please keep your camera on. And if you are not a member of the board at this point, please keep your camera off. That will help us see each other a little more quickly. So with that, we're going to have a report back from the breakouts, and we can discuss these things for another half an hour, and then we'll have a broader discussion for a half an hour after that. So let's present from the forestry group first. Who is going to present that
Sure.
part of the conversation?
That is me. I can
Great.
just find my notes here. So basically, we had some robust discussions with the forestry group, talking about the different options. I think there was overwhelming consensus with this group of eventually working to a revolving loan fund, but also understanding that the fund isn't fully capitalized yet, and that there is this 500,000 that should be spent so that people can start benefiting from the fund now. There was support for option one, although, that's an innovative idea and we don't have the logistics worked out, but the idea of providing buy down for interest buy down on interest for loans could really make a difference for small business owners. And so I think that's something that the forestry group thought could be very helpful for their stakeholders. I think we talked about other similar programs like the Direct Link program, which is a reduced interest loan, and kind of making sure we get lessons learned from similar programs as well. I think when it came to criteria, we had a little bit more discussion there. There was different ideas around some folks thought that there didn't need to be different criteria for larger or smaller grants, that it should be relatively the same. We don't want to have too many hoops to jump through. And that they thought it was really important that we are looking at, like, to give more points to capital access, because that is the major constraint for, the businesses that we're working with in underserved communities. And we talked about, if we did go with option 3, there may have to be some special criteria for that RFA because it's around buying down interest. And so it might look a little differently. For ineligible and eligible uses, I think there was different thoughts, but the number one thought was that as long like this, it has to be something that's related to infrastructure. So I thought there's this, some folks mentioned that it would be helpful to support kind of energy efficiency, especially when it's maybe upgrading equipment to make sure that they're more energy efficient. They think that's a good use of this infrastructure fund. Research and development, when it's related to something around infrastructure, could also be helpful. Things that should be ineligible, maybe projects where it would be like buying equipment that's diesel fuel, like using that might be a little counterproductive. We talked a little bit about sourcing main ingredients, which can look different for the forestry sector, but there are some businesses that do source like ingredients for processing outside. So for companies like that, this might not be the fund for them, but this idea of it would be a good idea to select a certain percentage of main ingredients for processing is good. And then there was also some comments on workforce training and things about energy efficiency. So there's a little bit of like two ideas there, is that there's a lot of sources of funding for workforce training, energy efficiency. So we don't want to have this fund be too broad. It really should be related directly to infrastructure. And around vehicles, obviously vehicles should apply, maybe not a company pickup truck, but especially when it comes to kind of like forestry harvesting, there are a number of vehicles that are the equipment for harvesting. So that is what the forestry group thought. People in that group, do you want to add anything? Did I miss anything?
I see thumbs up. And of course, in the full discussion, folks can give more details about what they said in the groups if they would like. Let's hear now from food processing.
I can report back from our group. So we started with a discussion about what TA looks like for applicants, whether that would be provided ahead of time and to whom and by whom. So that's kind of a question mark. We also talked about prioritizing smaller grants for a variety of reasons. It seems like because the amount of money is smaller, this would allow more applicants to be successful. So more applicants would receive funding, less would feel frustrated because they did not receive funding. And then more would be having this positive experience and talk about the program so that in the future, when more people are going to apply, they'll have kind of a better impression of the fund. In metrics, we had maybe a little bit of a similar discussion to Lily's group, that the metrics could probably remain pretty similar across these various grant sizes, with the exception being if we were to give out really large grants in the future, that might look a bit different. That maybe there should be more points for the first statutory goal around supporting the food and forest system generally. And that maybe there should be specific points around alignment with priorities of the department or the state. So one example would be maybe a focus on food access, whether the program supports increased food access. And then eligibility, we snuck in under the wire. And there was some support for interest payments for equipment purchases, and also the feeling that vehicles can be very useful, so maybe should be eligible. But there was another discussion about kind of whether the people who are receiving, who are eligible to apply should be a very broad group, or whether it should be really focused on certain sectors, more targeted based on, again, the priorities, or maybe which sectors really need the help the most. And that might kind of build on this idea of having fewer people kind of rejected and more people successful in applying. So and that's what we talked about. Thank you.
Thank you, Brittany. Did anyone from that group want to add anything now or wait until the group discussion? Seeing no hands, we'll turn to Director Lapine for a report back from the agriculture group.
So in our group, there was, I'm not sure if it was unanimous, but certainly strong consensus that option 2 would be the way to go in a first round. There was interest in the interest buy down idea for future rounds, but for the $500,000, there was pretty strong consensus that that should be a grants only round. There was some conversation if the tiers are up to 15,000 and up to 50,000, that maybe that's not a real difference, and that those would not need different criteria. That if we got to future rounds where we might be offering $150,000 grants versus $20,000 grants, then possibly, but at this point was not a feeling. Well, there was some discussion about, do we need different does that really need to be different categories? Does that create a layer of complexity we don't need? Or if it's a super simple application, regardless, maybe it's okay to have 2 tiers. Those were a couple of things that I heard. On the evaluation criteria, I think our group was not in agreement with the group that just went. I think there was a strong dislike for the impact, the economic impact standard as being one that would be difficult for smaller operations to justify. And so if we were to go with the criteria that was in the slide deck, people much preferred the second option where they were weighted, the different categories were weighted differently, and there were fewer points in that strengthening the economy line. So I'll just leave it at that. People can weigh in with more specifics. But that if we get the eligibility requirements right and we're increasing access to capital, then in theory, all of the grants should be having an economic impact, but it's much easier for a smaller operation to demonstrate something like being able to access a new market or bring a new product to market or something like that. And then again, we, like others, I've heard, we're sort of racing to the end on the eligibility question. So I'll let people weigh in with more specifics. But I did hear that there was at least one vote that software should be eligible because it is actually part of many other equipment purchases, and that soil amendments perhaps should be redefined and also deemed eligible. So there are two things that were ineligible that people wanted to move into that category. Sorry, Senator.
No worries. Is there anyone on the agricultural group that wanted to add a finer point to anything before we have a full discussion as a board? Seeing none. So I guess for this part of our work today, knowing that we won't be making any final decisions, I'll just sort of ask a general question, because the work is pretty much framed for us by statute and by all the work that has gone into it up till now. But if I were to ask all three sectors, what is the main priority for this fund for the $500,000? Even if it's not your sector, what would you say? Anyone want to jump in on that?
Senator, are you asking, is it equipment versus people versus something else? Is that the specificity you're looking for?
It's a general question and it can be answered in whatever framework you'd like to present it, Dana.
Okay. I would say it's, from our perspective, it's equipment that is either additive for expansion or to help upgrade.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll jump on that too. I think equipment for improved efficiencies from any perspective, grants to help small businesses access more efficient equipment.
Thank you. Jay, I'm going to pick on you because I know you sent us an email earlier today, and I know members of the public don't have access to that email. So if you'd like to share some of the thoughts from the email that you sent to us, that would be great.
Sure. So nothing to do with the question you just asked. You just want me to share my email?
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
I guess maybe working at Fame, I have a little bit of a unfair advantage on how maybe this fund should be structured, just because we've done these sort of things before. I think the consensus is working with grants at this point. The reason why I feel grants are an important thing to start with, if we do a revolving loan fund, we would have to hire a lending institution to administer the program, and it's very costly. And we don't have the funds really to do that. It would just diminish what we can actually give out to awardees. So I think to start with the grants would be the best option. I also think that they should be micro grants to get as many grants as possible out to people so that they have that positive experience. Word of mouth does go a long way. We learned this when we administered the Thrive program, which was it was sort of a grant program. The first round, it went well. It didn't go as well as we had hoped because we were on a first come, first serve basis, and unless you had a department that could put together the whole application packet, right, like very quickly, you were kind of left in the dark. So these smaller businesses weren't awarded any funds because it closed in about 24 hours. So the next round, we changed it up, and the funds were put into different silos based on how a business was formed, whether it was LLC or S corp. Um, but it also put it into different silos where it was, for technology or for nonprofits and many different other categories. And it was opened up to everyone. The timeline, there was a much longer timeline for submitting your applications. So all applications were reviewed. So it was a much fairer way to do it. The reason why I'm thinking that we need to keep it simple for the first round is because we do want this to be a positive experience for applicants. We did get some negative feedback on the first round of Thrive, and we got a lot of calls. It was hard to field all those calls, and I don't think we're going to want to have to deal with that with this. So even the criteria matrix, because the grant amounts, um, they don't vary that much between micro, small, and medium. It would be best to keep the criteria the same for all of them so that you don't, I mean, these farms and businesses will talk to each other. So, you don't want to unfairly, um, critique someone in the micro loan versus someone that also applied in the medium category. And I just think that we should be keeping it simple so that it's easier for us, easier for the applicant, and just creates a positive experience all around. I'm trying to think what else I wrote in my email. I know it was yesterday, but
It's okay. I just wanted you to share it with the group because, again, the work we do has to be as transparent as possible. And we don't really debate anything in email, but I just wanted you to put that into the record for us to listen to. I'm going to put people on the spot just because I'm feeling like that today. I also like to hear from Murata because I know that there was a meeting that you did not attend where you also gave the group some pretty good feedback on how you saw the design of this program. And so if you are willing to, can you please share that with us today?
Hi, thank you. I didn't, I don't have that email up in front of me. So I'll maybe try to answer your original question. Probably won't stray far from. In terms of like what the priority for this fund in the first round of funding, what I think it should be in taking in all of what we've heard. I really think that when the legislature gives our fund money, we put it to work quickly, effectively, to many stakeholders in many places with many beneficiaries. And that the way that we do that does leave a positive taste in people's mouths so that they can come back for more funding as a welcome process, as part of our ecosystem that we all work together in. So that coming to the state for funding through this fund for infrastructure building is something that's considered to be not a once in a business opportunity where there's a scarcity mentality, but a sort of a routine course of events that we come for small projects. Maybe when we're ready, we come for large projects. And that when we go back to the legislature for more money, it's welcomed as like a resoundingly good idea. Like they did such a great job with this first round. Let's give them more money. And the people are talking about it. I mean, we still have programs that are funded today that started 25 years ago and have funding every year. And I think part of the success of those programs is that they're consistently applied, fairly easy to get the money, and they really do benefit communities pretty broadly across the state. So that's what I think for this fund. I am also inclined to the micro grants at this stage because I do think micro grants are easier to apply for at many different stages of business and accessibility barriers. They just in general are easier to get that application in. And I'd like to see us get as many of them funded as we can. The best way to assure equitable access to our fund is to make sure we have enough funding. So I want to work on that goal, a little longer term goal, it sounds like.
Do you have an opinion on whether or not we need two different tiers in this first tranche, up to 50, up to 15? Do you have any opinions about that?
In this first tranche, I don't think that we do. I think with larger projects that we want them to have far-reaching impact, $250,000 projects, $100,000 projects, we might even weight that first.
Is it me?
But in the first round, no, I think there should be one score.
One scoring system for up to 50, or is that what I heard you say? You broke up just a little bit there.
I mean, if I I would respect where we all arrive on this together, but my hot take would be I'd lower the threshold down to maybe even 25 and have one metric.
Thank you. Anyone else want to weigh in on priorities for the use of this first $500,000, given the context that we know we are working within?
Yes, I'll throw something out that I mentioned in our group that didn't get brought up, and that was, I think, what was proposed in each of these options for TA could be cut. I'm in total support of the TA program and know that in statute it's one of the priorities, but I think round one, 50,000, we could cut down to 25,000 and get more into small grants going out. I'm also an advocate for keeping it all in one tier. I mean, most small farms, and I assume most food processors and even forestry, whether it's 15, 20, 25, 50,000, it's a simple project. It's usually going to be one piece of equipment, maybe two, or maybe you build a walk-in and a walk-in cooler and a walk-in freezer. They're not going to be complex. I think we can simplify the evaluation criteria, the metrics, and the application by just having all these grants be in one tier up to 50,000. I do want to bring in the question though, well, if that is the case, or if, like Murata suggests, we cap it at 25, are we allowing it just to be a partial? Like, do you have to use 100% of those funds for that piece of equipment? My example would be a vehicle, which I think should be allowed. Most new vehicles like a freezer van are $70,000, $80,000, $90,000. Can I apply for 50,000 and then, just use that grant for part? Is, I think, an eligibility question that hasn't been brought up. Another eligibility question is non-food producers. We have farms producing Christmas trees, flowers, ornamentals, things like that, which also is just another can of worms we haven't approached yet. I'll stop now before we all start pulling our hair out.
Thank you, Nicholas. Anyone want to respond to that, add to that, or bring up something entirely new that we haven't discussed yet? Director.
Just wanted to ask Nicholas to clarify, if he could, when you talked about reducing the amount spent for technical assistance, I think, at least what I heard in the breakout, and I apologize for not raising it, is that the amount that the department would hold back in order, or whatever, however the mechanism that we might hold back to support applicants, that would be reduced, but not necessarily that if someone applied for technical assistance as part of their ask, you're not necessarily weighing in on what their grant proposal would be about, but just that we should be putting as much of the money out the door to those grants and not holding as much back to support applicants. Is that correct?
I'm just going off my experience administering grants through MOFGA over the past few years. which has primarily been grant funding to provide applicants with TA support once they're awarded. So you could use it to hire financial farm advisor to help build spreadsheets for your farm. So that chunk of money, I think 50,000 is more than would be needed, especially given that we're only going to have 20 or maybe 30 awardees. And I'm still unclear as to the TA that we want to provide to applicants in terms of reviewing or putting together application. Yeah, how is that funded? I still don't understand how.
I feel like I just need more information about what kind of investment each applicant is going to need to be able to know where to set that threshold, because that kind of support with like especially around like different languages is a lot more costly than putting together spreadsheets typically. So I don't feel like it's quite like the one-to-one comparison, and we just like need more info.
Thanks, Alex. Any other thoughts on priorities of the fund? Is there any thought about the split across sectors? The $1 million question.
I had a question.
Who
That's
is
okay.
asking?
This is Amy, and I'm sorry that I'm camera off. I had a little, I don't really want to say it on public, but like I had a little mishap this morning, so I'm just happy that I'm at the meeting.
No worries.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering if it makes sense to look at established Maine State, Maine DACF investment objectives, if there are any codified that the department has been tracking, and really draw a line to those as far as sector impact. And because I feel like in the evaluation, it's important to like realize it's not just, I know the micros, it's a little bit trickier about whether it's just about the impact to the business versus the impact to the overall sector and the impact in the overall supply chain. So I'm just wondering if there's some data that could be used to know whether or not to preference any sector at this time. Thanks.
Thank you, Amy. You're welcome. Commissioner? Good to see
Yes,
you.
thank you. I would just say to that question, I would just really point us back to the presentation that we received toward the beginning of when we started meeting, really breaking down what we learned from the AIP program. The caveat that I will put out there, though, is we really don't have data related to forestry and logging on that front, not in the same way that we do for agriculture. And I don't know if there's more, other places that we can look, but we can't, I don't think that we're really in a position to draw lines between agriculture and forestry at this moment.
And when you say draw lines between, you mean?
Just in terms of how you would allocate the funds.
I see.
Yeah, just to point of clarification, I meant kind of, and I did not mean to be food focused to my friends in forestry at all, but I was actually thinking about like subsectors within each of those sectors. Okay. And because I was just sort of thinking like, okay, if there's been a lot of movement in dairy, and does it make sense to have a focus? And this goes to the point that Brittany raised that came up in our group about like, how do you make it focused? Like, so there's not, hordes of applications and unmet demand. Is there some focus? And thank you for bringing me back to that data that was presented to this group. That's very grounding. But yeah, I was just thinking like, okay, if there's a specific track where there's $25,000 grants that can be given to, ice cream makers to work with fluid milk providers and have like a truly handmade, Maine product or something like that. So that's just a hypothetical, but I was just sort of trying to think about like, I know there's been so much movement in the legislature to try to step in and help the dairy industry. So that was just an example that came to my mind about the economic impact and that is a sector that does impact so many communities too. So it gets at like, underserved communities, gets at all three sort of statutory objectives for the fund. I'll be quiet. Thanks.
Can I just respond? Is that okay? Yeah, so I would just say, again, another caveat with the AIP data is that remember that program ran a few years ago. And so the world continues to change. And I think that's why it's really important we're having this conversation as an advisory group, and that we've, reached out and wanted to pull in more feedback from outside of this group. And I think we need to continue to do that. And especially as the years go forward, we might come up with what we think is a really good plan for the tranche of funds we have right now. But I think we really do want to keep revisiting and trying to, pull in the best advice and data that we can access as we go forward.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anyone else? Lily, did you have a prompt that you might want to put out for our consideration in this part of our discussion?
Sure. Thanks to everyone for speaking and sharing their thoughts and sometimes going out on a limb. This meeting was really designed to have more time just for open discussion. I do think, when we think about this fund, we need to make sure that we remember, the kind of like the first two filters are that this is for underserved populations, and that is for projects related to infrastructure. So no matter what, everything that we're talking about has to revolve around kind of those two ideas. That's what's in statute. And I wasn't here for when it was the gleam in people's eyes, but that's what I've heard, and that's what I've read. So I just want to make sure that we remember, like, those are two really important parts to this fund. I think whatever we do, also for us to keep in mind that this is the first round. However we do RFAs for the first round of funding will give us a lot of different data points that will allow us to kind of design, longer term, kind of like the longer term program, whether it is a combination of grants and revolving fund, or we kind of go one way or the other. It's iterative. And so we're really in that iterative kind of process right now of figuring it out. Luckily, there are a lot of examples that we can learn from, but it's also something that in a way is kind of unique. And I think it has to do, as Commissioner Pilo was saying, look, the world's a different place right now, and it's also rapidly changing. So I see Amy's hand is up. Amy, are you raising your hand?
I am. I had just a quick question, and if now's not the time to explain it, but I know I should know this, so apologies to everyone. It's fairly basic, but I just wanted to get it clear in my head again. When you go out for rulemaking, you're going to adopt rules for the launch of this fund. But when you release an RFP, that's different, and you don't need to go back and do more rulemaking from year to year between round one and round two. Is that right? Because the discretion lies within the department in consultation with this board and the other department to be basically speccing out each round's RFP. Is that right? Or
That's
RFPs?
correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So the rulemaking, as I think you weren't here for that part of the conversation, but we'll create the broad guardrails. So the broad definitions, it's like one more step than statute, a little bit more detailed. But the request for applications will really be where we get into the details, and those may change from round to round based on priorities of the department, of the board, current events. You never know what may happen one year in agriculture or forestry that we might say, oh, we really need to focus on this. Like this year, for example, was a drought. So that's where we have a little bit more flexibility. I don't know if Craig, if you want to chime in at all.
I don't think that's accurate. I mean, Amy, you can think about it sort of the biggest container we're working with is the statute. The rules clarify things within that. And then, but that's still a relatively capacious structure, and lots of different kinds of RFAs could exist within those rules, and we don't need to change anything about the rules as we do the, as we move that around based on whatever emerging priorities there are.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm sorry to make you take the time to go through all that again. I know that's kind of should be under our belt.
No worries.
Anyone else? It looks like Jeff has a question. You may ask it aloud, sir, since you're on the board. Thank you.
Just to follow up on that final discussion. So how cumbersome is it sort of year to year, say, if you need to modify rules, that process?
I think it's pretty cumbersome, which is why you make as I say, they're broad guardrails that allow us to kind of work within, to make sure that it's for infrastructure and that it's for underserved populations and that, buying into heads of livestock do not count as infrastructure, that type of thing. So we want to keep it broad, but still defined with what we want for this fund, why it was created. And then it's those RFAs where you get into the specifics.
Any other thoughts, questions, discussion points that haven't been brought up? Nicholas.
I'd like to bring the specific that I brought to our group that got teased out to, and that was around the evaluation criteria that was proposed. The first three criteria on a couple of the slides were straight out of statute. And the first one named from the statute, part 2A, about how this impacts the economy. And I feel that that's too broad, that's too capacious in evaluation criteria. And something I didn't mention in the group, but I'll mention now too, is that as a grant reviewer, I don't know how to score that. How do you score 40 points or even 5 points to how this could impact the economy? Instead, my proposal is to look at statute 2B, which names specifically very clear list of things that this fund can do, which will support the economy, but it's a much more, I think, measurable, evaluative list in which our evaluation criteria and indeed then metrics could be frameworked around. So I just wanted to bring that to the group too for consideration.
And what Nicholas is talking about is, it's in our packet. It is the goals, investment, and inclusiveness part of statute, which is in section 320A, subsection 2. And then subsection 2B reads, expand infrastructure investments in the agricultural, food, and forest products economy to increase access to new markets and opportunities for producers, processors, small businesses, and consumers in the state in the producing, processing, manufacturing, packaging, distribution, marketing, sale, and consumption of products. That is what he is referring to, which is more specific than 2A, which is almost, this is the background and the context that Lily keeps bringing up, which we do have to consider always. It's the framework through which we consider everything, is making sure that there is more inclusive of and increasing investments in historically marginalized, underrepresented, and underserved communities, including communities of color, low-income communities, etc. But I think that the chart just uses the very first phrase of that, which is says, strengthen the state's agricultural, food, and forest products economy. And I think what Nicholas is saying is that how do you score that on an application if in fact you can't tell what its exact impact is going to be? Am I understanding you correctly, Nicholas?
Yes, exactly. And the thing that really jumped out at me from 2B was the packaging, which wouldn't really fall under 2A. If you're measuring a grant proposal based on someone who wants to buy packaging, I don't know how it wouldn't score high. Whereas if your criteria is straight out of statute allows you to use these funds to purchase packaging. That should be something then that we're allowing to score points on for an applicant.
Thank you. Any other thoughts about that from the board member?
Would I be incorrect in thinking that the line 2A about the economy, that's almost like an overarching what the entire fund collectively should do, and maybe that's just not what we should be scoring on. Would that be a fair evaluation of that?
It's certainly Nicholas's argument for the purposes of this part of our discussion.
It sounds like that could be part of some larger grants down the road in further rounds, perhaps, where you're looking at more system-wide impact from individual projects. That makes sense.
Say that one more time, Jeffrey.
Yeah, is that something that maybe becomes more relevant as down the road with later rounds, as there's larger grants that have more system-wide impact?
I think I won't answer that except to say that I think I heard a little bit of that from Murata in what she talked about earlier. That sometimes there's this ripple effect on economic impact that we don't actually see it until it's there. And if you have smaller grants, micro grants going to many different stakeholders across many communities in the state, you're hopefully going to get positive feedback about the program. And the community-based food systems that may be positively impacted by those micro grants across the state will still not necessarily be able to be measured on their economic impact until some future time. But people may feel it in the immediate time frame. And so we just don't know what we're going to see and how we will understand its economic impact over time. If that helps. Nicholas?
To reflect on Erica's point that she just put in the chat and mentioned in our group too. Yeah, a good metric can often be adding jobs, but a point I bring against that and did in earlier discussions with this board, a perfect example would be my farm. We recently purchased a $30,000 wild blueberry harvester, which actually cuts jobs. We no longer have 6 to 8 hand rakers for our blueberry crew. Massive improvement to the economics of my farm, and we're having harder and harder time finding people who want to hand rake blueberries. So again, that's looking at the metrics of how you impact the economy, especially by number of jobs, is to me inappropriately applicable to small farms at this state, this proposed round of funding. Small farms need small grants, often to just get more efficient, not to create jobs. And again, the statute 2B, I think, more appropriately lays out for us and reviewers and applicants what this funds and how these applicants can be viewed.
Excellent point. Murata?
I mean, it might be arguable and probably beyond the scope of this board to fully explore the sort of determination to improve the economy can often be like the cause of underserving our communities. So given that that's certainly a much larger conversation, but it might be worthwhile to just take a bold stance for the purpose of this fund and say, we have a lot of ways in which we improve the economy. Many of them are beyond the scope of grant, especially micro grants. And what we're doing collectively to improve the economy does not always seem to serve equitably and certainly doesn't ensure access. So for the purpose of a state funded micro grant program, we can just say, let's focus on that. And I think we can be a little bit bold here. We have an opportunity to, and the mandate to in some ways.
Thank you, Murata. We are at 2:20, and this conversation can certainly continue for another 5 hours, but at least another 2 or 3 when we are in person in October. I did want to provide the public an opportunity to provide input to us today. So if anyone would like to speak on the record, please raise your virtual hand. Seeing no one, I would ask if Erica would like to address anything she's heard. I see some comments in the chat from Erica, so if you could please just respond generally to what you have heard, and maybe answer some questions that came up throughout this discussion, that'd be appreciated. Please proceed.
Yeah, sure. I think that this discussion, first of all, has been very robust and helpful. And, sometimes just putting something out from everything that Lily and others heard is just so helpful to say, like, be able to react to and really crystallize what you want for this fund. So I just think the discussion has been so helpful. And I know Lily's going to continue to get feedback from everyone. Yeah, I mean, I think we have some seems like some agreement on things, and then probably a few more decisions to dive into. But yeah, I don't have anything too specific. I was just commenting. I do think a lot of what we've heard is resonant with what we were hearing in a lot of the interviews, as well as, the surveys that we did. And I do think it's also just important to keep the, the part of the statute around underserved businesses as part of the forefront. That's all. I think I'll say. Thank you.
Absolutely. Tammy, welcome. You can turn on your camera if you'd like. It's up to you. And you are on mute.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
First, I want to say thank you to everyone for actually having this board. It's super important to me and my family as we are starting to embark on a forestry / nut and berry multi-generational farm, and our farms, I should say. So I just want to say thank you to everyone, and I'm looking forward to the end result. And I love being able to be a part of this and watching it, develop. So thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for being here. Anyone else from the public who wishes to say a word or two to the board? I don't see any hands. Lily, did you want to say anything sort of to close out this part? I know all we really need to talk about next, which I can also turn over to you, is our next meeting and what we intend to do, and anything that we may want in the interim. I'd also circle back to Sarah Littlefield is here now, and wanted you to tell us on mic that you were willing to be considered to be nominated and voted into a co-chair position alongside myself, which we wouldn't do today, but if that is something that you would like for us to consider at the next meeting, please speak now or forever hold your peace.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to speak for myself. I appreciate it. I would be willing to be considered, yes.
Great. And was there anyone else, just one more call, for any member of the board who wanted to nominate themselves or anyone else? All right, Lily.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you again to everyone. This has been a really robust conversation. It's been really helpful to hear people's thoughts and kind of reflecting back what I've reflected back to you. And so the next step is, like I said, I'll reach out to folks over the next month to distill feedback. I might follow up on a couple of things that I've heard about how to make this realistic with you all, and we'll put it into a digestible package that then we'll look at in person in October and come to consensus on. At the October meeting, we'll, I think officially, I don't know, Senator Hickman, if we have to have an official vote maybe for our co-chair, but where we may make it, somehow make it official. And another thing that I'd like to do is we'll have a discussion around, I think, bonds and what does that mean to be fully capitalized. And then we'll have a chance to come to consensus. So this next meeting for the board will be in person. It will be held in Brewer at Jeff's Catering and Events. So we'll get the details out to you on that. I'd like people to come by 12 o'clock if they can. We are working on providing kind of like a lunch buffet of sandwiches and salad, things like that. We will go until 3 o'clock. So since we'll be in person, I think we'll need more time to talk, get to know each other, and hash out some of these different logistics. So it'd be a 3-hour meeting with lunch. Details to come. If anybody has any questions, let me know. We will still have, as long as the audiovisual setup allows us to, but we're working with Jeff's Catering on this. There'll still be a Zoom possibility. So I really, really hope that we can prioritize to make this meeting in person. I know we're all over the state of Maine, and that's a lot of driving, but I hope that we could come together. If not, there will be a Zoom option, and we'll still have that available for members of the public as well. Does anyone have questions about the in-person meeting? October 29th, 12 o'clock. Brewer.
I don't see any hands with questions. And I know, Lily, you said you might want to invite some folks if they were interested to talk a little bit more about the design of this program in a subcommittee format. That would, I believe, in my mind, as a chair of this board, sort of require us to vote on who would be on that. So I don't know if you want to do that now or not, or if you just want to keep your conversations one-on-one with folks, and then when we come back together again, we can just do it all in a full discussion.
Thoughts about that? Or I can just talk to folks one-on-one and we come together and talk about it in a big group. Maybe that's easier for folks.
I did want to just, before we adjourn, Brittany said something in the presentation from her group. I believe it was infrastructure, food processing infrastructure. And that was, even though the statute governs what we do, the statute doesn't exist in isolation. It exists in a statutory framework. And she said that we might want to make sure that we are considering ways to use this grant to also further the purpose of increasing access to food, since we have a lot of goals in our statutes to do that. And they're not mutually exclusive. We can still provide infrastructure to underserved communities while also strengthening community-based food systems and increasing access to food. So that's just something to think about when we talk about design, eligibility, priorities, scoring. I just wanted to put that out there as a closing thought so that folks can carry that into our discussion when we meet in person. I do hope to see everyone in person in Brewer. I certainly intend to be there in person. I'm looking forward to it because I haven't met many of you in person. And it feels like we're in the COVID days with just being on a Zoom screen, having these really important conversations. So I do look forward to having an in-person meeting because I couldn't attend the last in-person meeting because we were in the throes of session. So any closing thoughts from anyone? Great. Well, we look forward to seeing everyone in a month or so. And in the meantime, stay safe. If you're putting up food, have at it. And let's still pray for rain because we need it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. This meeting is adjourned.
Bye.